Welcome back. In this new video, I'm going to talk a little bit about President Donald Trump, who engaged a high-profile social media feud with Pope Leo, the first United States born in this scenario, following the Pope's criticism on the United States military action in Venezuela and Iran. Trump posted on his Truth social media that Pope Leo was weak in crime and terrible for foreign policy. This post is unacceptable, unprecedented. This also nationalist critic of a religious authority and its a rare instance of a United States president directly attacking a sitting pope's competence, framing the Pontiff as a radical left politician rather than a spiritual leader. Let's see what Trump wrote on his social media post. The Pope is weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. He talks about the fear of the Trump administration, but doesn't mention the fear that the Catholic Church and all other Christian organizations had during COVID, when they were arresting priests, ministers, and everybody else for holding church services, even when going outside and being 10 and 20 feet apart. I like his brother Louis much better than I like him, because Louis is all MAGA. He gets it, and Leo doesn't. I don't want a pope who thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. I don't want a pope who thinks it's terrible that America attacked Venezuela, a country that was sending massive amounts of drugs into the United States, and even worse, emptying their prisons, including murderers, drug dealers, and killers, into a country, our country. And I don't want a pope who criticizes the President of the United States because I'm doing exactly what I was elected in a landslide to do, setting record low numbers in crime and creating the greatest stock market in history. Leo should be thankful because, as everyone knows, he was a shocking surprise. He wasn't on any list to be pope and was only put there by the church because he was an American. And they thought that would be the best way to deal with President Donald Trump. If I wasn't in the White House, Leo wouldn't be in the Vatican. Unfortunately, Leo's weak on crime, weak on nuclear weapons, does not sit well with me, nor does the fact that he meets with Obama sympathizer like David Alex Rod, a loser from the left who is one of those who want churchgoers and clerics to be arrested. Leo should get his act together as Pope. Use common sense, stop catering to the radical left, and focus in being a great Pope, not a politician. It's hurting him very badly, and more importantly, is hurting the Catholic Church, President Donald Trump. Yes, he really said that. And let's share what also Vice President said about Pope Leo. It's even worse. Vice President J.D. Vance criticized Pope Leo XIV for not knowing enough theology. I think it's very, very important for the Pope to be careful when he talks about matters of theology. If you are going to opine on matter with theology, you've got to be careful. You've got to make sure it's anchored in the truth, he said at a Turning Point conference. One of the many, many ironies about this statement is that it came in response to Pope Leo comments about war and peace, and specifically the concept of a just war, which originated with St. Augustine, As many have already noted, when the Vice President was making his comment, Poppulio, a member of the Augustinian order and twice prior general of the Augustinians before his election as Pope, was visiting the hometown of St. Augustine, then called Hippo, now in Annaba, a town in modern-day Algeria. For good measure, Pope Leo XIV, the man critiqued for insufficient theological education and not only a master's degree in divinity but also licentiate and doctorate in canon law from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. Incidentally, the day before, the Vice President said that the Pope and the Vatican should stick teaching about morality, also seeming to forget that war and peace are profoundly moral issues. For his part, Pope Leo was focused on his spiritual father, St. Augustine, after what seemed like an emotional visit to Hippo. He celebrated Mass at the Basilica of St. Augustine in Annaba. During his homily, he said, "The primary task of the pastors as ministers of the gospel is therefore to bear witness to God before the world with one heart and one soul, so permitting our concern to lead us astray through fear, nor trend to undermine us through compromises." Now, I want to share with you a very interesting post of Friar James Martin, Jesuit, an American Jesuit, I deeply appreciate. And it's a very interesting reflection. Dear friends, I don't know any Catholic in the United States, from the most traditional to the most progressive, who does not have strong feelings about the comments from President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance about Pope Leo XIV. They include not only President Trump's initial disrespectful social post about the Holy Father, but also Vice President Vance similarly disrespectful comment about Pope Leo having to be careful when he speaks about theology. Let me share some of my own feelings. First of all, it is shocking that the President and Vice President could treat such a good, holy, and learned man with such a disdain. Imagine telling a man with the Holy Father's learning and experience and authority that he doesn't understand theology sufficiently. What's more, imagine attacking him as ridiculously weak on crime or somehow not understanding foreign policy. Second, I'm edified by Pope Leo's charitable and courageous response to all this. Charitable because he has not responded in any way, often with charity and respect. As some of you may know, I know Holy Father slightly, thanks to our being seated together at the Synod for 2 weeks, and now him to be a kind, reserved, discerning, and highly intelligent person. In a word, a holy. But courageous too, as we have seen during his time in Algeria and Cameroon. Pope Leo has not shied away from continuing to preach the gospel and speak out in favor of peace. And yes, he understands Augustine's concept of the just war and against, as he said today, tyrants and those who could use God's name to support violence of bloodshed. So, where will this all end? It's hard to say, but I could imagine that now that the taboo has been broken, politicians will continue to denigrate him and thus try to persuade people without saying it explicitly to think that the Pope's words do not need to be listened to. But this will be in vain for two reasons. First, Pope Leo is clearly fearless. A few hours after he was elected as Pope, I spoke with a fellow Augustinian priest who had known Bob for decades. He is a great listener, a very kind and much loved than he posed, but it's no pusher. But the main reason that the Pope's words will be heard is less about Robert Prevost's own many virtues, but something else. The Vicar of Christ will be heard because he is preaching the gospel. As Jesus told his disciples, heaven and earth may pass away, but my words will never pass away. So, in these strange times, we pray for the Holy Father and fear not. I want to, just finish with a quote of Pope Leo. The master of war pretends not to know that it takes only a moment to destroy. Yet a lifetime is often not enough to rebuild. They turn a blind eye to the fact that billions of dollars are spent in killing and devastation. Yet the resources needed for healing, education, and restoration are nowhere to be found. Pope Leo. Let's all continue to pray for the Holy Father as he works for peace. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.